Okay, welcome to our basically weekly meeting on incremental language development. We will be hitting 500 hours of live streaming a few minutes into this. So thanks to everybody who's watched these and for lots of terrific comments, suggestions, things that have improved our products and added interesting ideas. Actually, we're going to start from one that comes from someone who's watched these live streams, Pete Morkos, who we've been talking about this function that we've been calling Spliced for about 2 years now. And we've never liked the name. And Pete has said, your name is terrible, and he's got some better suggestions. And this is kind of our 11th hour moment to change the name for 12.1. And I want to start off by talking about that. Okay. So the main people on the live stream are talking about when am I going to talk about the physics project? Very, very soon. I just came from a meeting working on some of the launch plans for that. I am working actually harder than I have worked. I work very hard, as some of you may know, but I've been working more intensely than I can remember having done in decades on this project to try and get it ready so that I can present it to people. We've got what is now about a 300-page document that is sort of the basic story of what's going on. We've actually been recording all of the working sessions that have led to all of this. It's about 300 hours of recordings now. They wouldn't make a lot of sense without the context, so there's not much point in putting them out there yet. But I am hoping we are within a month of being able to present all this stuff. It's gone really great. It's really, really wonderful, fascinating, deeply abstract, quite a tower of different kinds of abstractions, which is why the pieces won't make sense without being able to show more of the context. But I'm super looking forward to being able to share that with people, and it's coming very soon. Working hard on it. All right, I'm back to to be clear, the reason I've been doing less live streaming, well, part of the reason is because of the 12.1 release, and we're in kind of bug fixing and finishing mode, and part of it is because I've been spending all my time working on the physics project. All right, refocus. We're talking about some things that splice into lists, okay? And of which nothing was our original kind of model. And I think the point that Peter's been making, which he is not wrong about, is we are trying to describe, with the word spliced, we're trying to describe what happens rather than what the thing is. And since the thing that sits there, it's a what it is more important. So let's so this type of thing, sequence replace, well, is not quite the story, is it? Because sequence replace would insert that as a list, right? It wouldn't insert it as a sequence, correct?
Right. The point there is that he suggested to do it directly in replace. I think that may be quite non-trivial to implement, but
well, that's a different issue. I mean, that would be making sequence replace able to be called directly from replace, which I think is interesting. But I think that's a future enhancement. I think the main issue here is, I mean, there's a problem in having anything here because replace is such a structural operation. As soon as we have anything here, if you want to do metaprogramming and replace that thing without replacing it as you get what I'm saying? It's going to get very complicated. I'm a little bit concerned about that, but
so
yeah, well, this is a no-op right here. I mean, the spliced on the left-hand side of this is a no-op, isn't it?
Well, it works as given in the next line. So what I was thinking is perhaps we can generalize the previous one, so it's more symmetric. If you are working with spliced objects.
Oh yeah, yeah. We should absolutely allow that first thing. I completely agree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And yes, and because we don't have a pattern sequence doesn't allow doing similar things. You have to construct the full object, preparing patterns for the left and right sides. I was wondering whether pattern sequence allows something like that, but I don't think it does by itself.
Right. So let's see. Pattern sequence. What is the relationship? Now I'm confused about an additional point. The relationship of pattern sequenced to the future of spliced.
Well, pattern sequence is something that is understood by replace and replace all, and can take a pattern, but sorry, a sequence.
What does pattern sequence do?
Well, it accepts more general things like that. So this is a trivial case, but you can put general patterns inside.
Right. Right. So it is something very much like, I mean, this idea of a list fragment or something would work the same way as this, if I'm not mistaken.
Similarly, and in fact, sequence replace uses internally pattern sequence. But
yeah, wait a minute. I'm still missing the point of what this actually does.
So to me, this is the left-hand side version of things, while splice is the right-hand side version of things.
Yes. Although this is more general, and this works in any function, not just list.
Right. Yes.
And doesn't it? And this, this doesn't have the explode on contact version because issue because it is. Yeah. Right. Okay. We reached our 500 hours. Yeehaw. Okay. I don't know what 500 hours. There must be these principles about after you've been doing something for some amount of time. I think it's like 10,000 hours. You're supposed to be an expert. I think altogether we've been doing these design reviews for a lot more than 500 hours, but at least we've been able to share 500 hours of them. Okay, let's come back to this. So coming back here, okay. So the thing we're mostly talking about here is basically naming.
Yeah, the first point is the main one.
Actually, let's see. See, I'm trying to. I'm confused by this thing. So Pete Morkos, who was the person who kindly sent in a bunch of detailed suggestions, just sent something to the live stream, but I am trying to understand what it is that was sent, and I'm not completely getting it. So if somebody can resend that to me in a form that's easier for me to digest, that would be good. Okay. Are there various other questions on our live stream here? Carl is asking about neural nets live stream. Yeah, we could do that actually. We're certainly going to be talking about the GAN stuff that's coming. I don't know whether people other than me will probably talk about that in more detail. I will certainly be doing a 12.1 live stream once 12.1 is ready to roll, which should be in a small number of weeks. Question is, are all the Redmine open issues going to be resolved for 12.1? I don't know the answer to that. I doubt that they'll all be resolved, but I think I think we should be doing another iteration of commenting on those issues and suggestions, and I don't know why that hasn't been scheduled. Let's see. Just 1 second here. Okay. All right. So Pete is sending through some sample English sentences, which is a useful thing to do. Okay. I'm not sold on the multiple items thing. I like the word multiple. I don't like the word items.
Having list in the name may be useful to denote the fact that this only responds in lists.
Yes, I don't even understand this one here because this is using it more like sequence. I mean, this whole issue. I mean, this should certainly work, right? And that works with Spliced. Yes.
Right. Yes.
What is this one here?
Yeah, the next case, if we try to use that with sequence would splice inside if too early. And so that's useful to.
Oh, I see what this is doing. I get it. Oh, that's nice, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a very nice use case.
Yeah, people use sequence add to do those type of things.
I know. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
Well, I do like the multiple being, because it is what it's doing. It's representing multiple items. I don't disagree. The problem is the word item has a bit of a troubled history. All right, let's look at some of our other things. I think.
Well, sorry. While thinking about this, I was considering Sublist, given that it's what we use in the sequence XXX functionality, and we also now have subset, which feels so close.
But doesn't suggest that it's an active thing. I mean, subset is, what does subset do?
No, I mean, we have created the subset function, subset sequence, subset positions, similar to sequence.
Yes, I understand. Subset position and so on, but I don't, but they have a very different setup than this thing. Okay, so let's write down the suggestions that we have on the table. I think there were a couple that I made in, did you capture the ones that I made in the email that I sent?
We have the correspondence in email correspondence in the next section.
Okay.
At the end, I think the last subsection is the email exchange.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the very first section, I tried to give the full list of names that were suggested. In the correspondence.
Wait. What was the one that I suggested there?
Can you open the first subsection of the first section of that one? No, sorry, of the material. Yeah, that one.
Okay. Right. So I do think we should consider the non-list case. I do think that's interesting as a thing to, as an inserter to go into other things. For example, the issue is, when does it unpack? And
yes. But we had considered that situation, and our main worry is that because this works currently as an app value, it wouldn't necessarily work in some cases, like holding objects.
Sorry, I'm sorry, what are you saying? I mean, the case that I'm thinking about is there are functions that just happen to take varargs things, and you want this to be, I don't know, it's like some of the more mathematical functions that happen to where you want to package it. You don't want to have to say, What's a good example?
Outer
Yeah,
F.
yeah, okay, yeah, outer F, and then you want to say something like argument sequence blah blah blah, but now where that's a list,
Mm-hmm.
and where the only currently you would do sequence at, which is really horrifying. And the idea would be, the question is, when does this explode on contact, so to speak? And one way to do that would be to have some kind of tagging that says this happens in outer only. Another possibility would be to have some kind of bank of things in which it can happen, more like listable, for example. I mean, what this is unpackable in the same kind of way that list is unpackable.
Right.
Right. So I mean, this is the analog. So we could imagine. So let's explore this possibility. We could imagine a class of functions that are not. This is the opposite of listable. Listable just means this is, you ingest this into the very innards of the function itself, right? Rather than you've got a list here, and instead of listing the function over it, you are inserting that as a varargs thing. See what I'm saying?
Yep.
That's too technical and horrifying for that. But I mean, okay, so it isn't really varargs. It's really, what does it say? What does it want to say? It wants to say this is an attribute of a function. That would mean this is a function in which this packaging will unpack, right? Without you telling it to do so. And there are functions where it wouldn't happen. Like, for instance, I mean, okay, what will be the category of functions in which that, and it might be some arguments of those functions, this unpacking would happen? Am I making sense?
Yeah, so it's a bit in the same way that sequence always unpacks, and we have the attribute sequence hold. You want the opposite. It never unpacks, but you want to force it.
That's correct. That's correct. Right. There's a class of functions in which it unpacks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that listable, now 30-something years old, has been a very successful attribute. It most of the time does what people expect. It
Mm-hmm.
has some issues, but most of the time it does what people expect. Okay, let's understand this notion of generalization of up values, because I haven't really understood this.
Me neither. I think this is really up values. And Pete Morcos was suggesting this example of pair with next, which I think we can do with some values.
Wait a minute. Become some of the up values because they become active when inside a specific head. I see. I mean, the issue with up values, which it was one of those things where, 33 years ago, when I originally invented up values, the idea that they would only go up one level was let's put this in to begin with and see if we ever need to go further. And in a third of a century, we haven't needed to go further. But it surprised me that we haven't needed to go further. I mean, occasionally we do, and there are some interactions between up values and sub values that don't work very well. Am I making sense? I mean, like for example, a typical case where we run into trouble is f of g of x of h of x, where we want to hang something somehow on the g of x, right? And we can't do that right now.
Right.
Although there's nothing in the concept of up values that would prevent that. Just doesn't happen to work.
I think it's a matter of implementation and combinatorics. The more levels it has to explore, the slower it could be.
Sure. But I mean, I don't think we've looked at this in years, how to think about this. I think it could be looked at again, and particularly as we work on, the compiler meets the evaluator, that might be a possibility. But okay, let's not worry about that for right now. Okay, let's go back here to where do we have the list of names? Okay.
I think your suggestion was list sequence.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. All right, so let's take a look again. See, I worry that people will read multiple items in the wrong way as more like multiply.
And as you said, we have item used in so many places in relation to typesetting.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just going to write random words here for a second. This isn't right. These aren't right. Something that I found surprisingly successful, which was a name I was worried about, was any true and all true and that family. I was worried about those, but they've actually worked out well as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the trouble is we would really love to have this not sound technical, because it isn't a technical concept, really. Okay, Peter's commenting about this active values thing that suggests the pattern of nothing and spliced extends to other things that need to make local structure modifications, and so can't be done as a single replacement. I see what you're saying. That the container in which they live, is being affected by whatever is happening with them. I agree. Yes, I had thought about multiple elements. Gosh, how do we make this? Multiple elements. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about things like several items, but that's not very good. Several elements. Oh dear, everybody. This is one of these, sometimes with this naming thing, you nail it in no time at all. I remember one of our all-time worst naming horrors was manipulate, which in the end I think we got a good name for. But boy, did that take a lot of time. And did it go through so many two-word, dynamic interaction, something or other things. Okay, so what we're looking for is something that represents this idea of multiple. And unfortunately, multiple on its own. See, this is such it's a funny thing how language, the concepts that we have sort of developed. Okay, now I'm going philosophical here. Sort of the concepts we've developed as a civilization, both mold. Well, it's very awkward that there are just certain words and they have. Yeah. Anyway, it's a pity we can't just go back and redesign the whole of the way that we communicate. I mean, we're trying to do our little part of that. All right, let's see. Trying to think about. See, unfortunately, things like the many sort of collection and so on and so on and so on. They all have the sense of really what this is we're treating this thing. This is a packaged version of multiple items.
Well, the fact that it could have only one would that be a problem for multiple related words?
Oh, that's an interesting point.
I was looking at all the names we have with multi inside.
Yeah.
And none of them is a multiple. It's all multi-somethings.
Let's look at list fragment for a minute. It's a pity that that can be a verb. All right, we'll look at list elements. Let's look back here. Let's look at our examples. Where do we have what on earth is this?
So that's an observation from Pete Marcos as well. The fact that it would be good if spliced inside itself, and it already does. He was suggesting this when there wasn't an internal list, when it was a var arc object. But I think it's an interesting point that it now does it automatically because we have the internal list.
Oh, you mean splices itself? Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
Because spliced is not varargs but has a list.
Mm-hmm.
Splice can splice things into itself.
Exactly.
Boy. Let's take this example. If this said see, unfortunately, list elements again has yeah, Carl was pointing out list element sounds like a verb. The well, so Peter's pointing out that, how you say these things, which I agree with, is, replace the X with, fill in what you'd say. I mean, what you might have said is replace the X with the sequence, blah, 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 except that we have a technical meaning for that.
So perhaps list sequence is not bad because it's a particular case of sequence for lists.
Well, I know, that's why I suggested it.
Mm-hmm.
Is it confusing with respect to other uses of sequence? I mean, it would allow us to go for argument sequence for the other thing,
Yep.
Which I think is quite nice.
Yes. I wonder whether people would expect it to be var arc, like sequences.
Yeah. Okay, but let's discuss. Replace X with. Look, replace X with the spliced is pretty horrible. You'd end up saying with a spliced object.
Yes.
I mean, we had discussed before some of these inline words, but I think they're the wrong metaphor. Boy, it's so frustrating when it's hard to figure stuff out. All right, come on, other people here, speak up. Other people are here, I know. Is Danny here? Suggest something crazy. I'm going to pick on somebody if nobody, like Nick, for example, suggest something crazy.
Yeah, I was trying to think of something related to bundled or packaged.
Mm-hmm.
Parceled.
It's a completely different metaphor than we've ever had before.
Yeah, just trying to take a different way to approach it.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think a one-word version of something that is a packaged up collection of elements.
Stuffed? That's maybe a little.
Elements.
Yeah.
Elements is too generic. Stuffed is too like a bear.
Yeah, I mean, we have like the internal stuff bag sort of notion, but it's a little different.
And I think
what is something like the parcel? What is something that is a package that is packaged up? A parcel, a package, a thing that has a container. You know what I'm saying?
But isn't this the opposite analogy we want? Because we want something that it's like it doesn't have a cover around it, and it will splice. More like peeled.
We had the peeled idea, but that again is like spliced. I mean, peeled is like spliced.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is the idea here is to represent that this is a package which will be unpacked, so to speak.
Bundle?
I think that's used for too many other things.
Yeah. Packet is also used for other things.
Yeah, I mean, I think these things that say, like wrapper, we've often used the term wrapper for other things. I think we're going to wind up using wrapper to mean something that stays there.
Mm-hmm.
What we need here is a form of packaging which expects to be unpacked. This is a thing where you're going to, this will automatically unpack, which is why we ended up with spliced, because we're concentrating on the automatic unpacking. But this is now the idea that this is a thing that is I mean, by the way, just to give people another sense of naming, I mean, association was another thing. It was a pretty hard one name, which has again been a good name. It's a little abstract, but it, if this construct is widely used, which I think it will be, people, it has allowed a little amount of abstraction because people will learn what it means, so long as it connotes the right thing. Yeah, Sandra is suggesting things like chunk and lump. The problem with the container is you expect it to stay. What we need is a
Did we already say element sequence?
way too long, way too abstract, in my view.
Segment?
Okay, so one that I think is interesting here, but is one from Ethan on our live stream, sequence graft, which suggests the word graft, but I think it's too weird.
I'm looking at. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that I'm looking at synonyms of sequence. This chain, run.
It's not going to work. I don't think chain is going to work, but I think that Pete is remarking that he thinks it should be a plural word, and I think it'd be much nicer if it didn't have to be a plural word, because that would save the confusion of a single element there. And although, I mean, it does have the advantage. Okay, a plural word has the advantage of knowing you are potentially putting multiple things. Gosh, there are so many of these words that mean, what you need is this thing. What is a metaphor for this, where the thing is automatically opened out and oh boy, there's got to be something in the world where you expect to put it in and it immediately sort of kind of like, okay, in a text editor, you obviously are.
Something good in the word sequence is that it is a singular, but it represents a collection. So there must be other words like that.
Let's see. What about insertion? Something around that. No, it's hopeless. It's unreadable. X is an insertion. Yeah, some suggestions on the live stream here that are interesting, like envelope, but it isn't the right thing because that is the thing itself. It is not what the whole point is we want to focus on what's inside, not the wrapper itself. Infusion, interesting suggestion. Bit technical sounding. Better than graft. What is the word when when you want something to, I mean, I don't like the concept of the skin graft type graft thing, but when you want something, when you are putting something into something and you want it to just sort of melt into the thing that it was put into, what are some metaphors around that idea?
Dissolving.
Yeah, but I hardly think we're going to. A dissolution seems like it's
dissolved also is not great.
Right. I mean, but we want the concept of it is the thing, it is not the act of dissolving, it is the thing that will be dissolved into, that will be
dissolved into the solvent.
Yes.
Does the notion of carried make any sense?
Carried. What does that mean? I mean, you got a bunch of suggestions on the live stream about things like melt and so on, but I think again that is not what we're. Actually, Pete's really good point, which I thank him for, is name the thing, not the action that's going to happen to it. In other words, we got to name the thing you are putting in there, not not either its container or what you're naming is the thing that's going in there. And solute is way too weird. And doesn't get the sequencing part of it. I mean, what one wants is what is a metaphor in I mean, splice comes from things like movie editing and so on, or traditional film, old-fashioned film editing, where you literally you splice something into the what are some other words that are what's another example of where you put something into something, like a text editor, for example? You insert a piece of text and it once you've inserted it, you wouldn't know the difference, so to speak. It's just become one with the rest of the text.
Guess there's like entwined or braided.
No, but you see those, you're not naming the right thing.
Yeah.
You're not naming the thing itself.
Mm-hmm.
What you got to name is the thing itself. The whole point with a graft, which is interesting, but I think unusable, is it is, there is both the action of doing the graft, but there is the graft itself, which is the thing that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The thing that goes in there.
The implant itself.
You see that's a, oops. It's a bit too weird sounding, but it's an interesting concept. I didn't misspell it, did I? No, it's implant. It's IM, yeah. The fact that I'm even asking that question is a very bad sign. Intertwine. Strand. Yeah, the problem with strand is that it's a what is a thing? Come on, some other metaphors beyond splicing into films, inserting into text editor.
Thinking like in woodworking, if you insert
that's a good point.
Another piece in, you're inlaying it.
It is an inlay. It's a bit of a weird metaphor.
Yeah.
Bit of a weird
Reminds
metaphor.
me of inset.
Yeah, I mean, an example of a weird metaphor that we were very concerned about was the sow reap metaphor, but I think that one has worked.
Mm-hmm.
I like that one. How obscure is the word inlay?
It reminds me immediately of overlay, which we already have.
What does it mean?
It's overlay and
image.
image.
Yeah, right.
It sounds like a typesetting thing.
But it does mean roughly the right thing. I'm not pushing it that hard. I don't think it quite works. But maybe something, I mean, these are different directions than we've gone in before. I mean, that one, to me, that's, okay, keep thinking of metaphors in the world for things like this. An inlay in a piece of wood, something which once inserted, be nice to get the sequence aspect of it in there as well, though. I think it's too weird, and it's too weird for non-native English speakers and things like that. With an inlay, it's just a weird word.
Dovetail's probably going in the wrong direction too.
A dovetail.
Yeah.
No. I think it's very amusing. At least if we needed to iconize it, it would be funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with the comments on the live stream that inlay is nice, but not. It's a bit too metaphorical, visual. All right, we're going to get there, guys. We're going to get there. Oh, patch. Patch is interesting. Patch is an interesting word. Unfortunately, people, it's too much. It sounds too much like fixing a bug. But it is, again, an interesting word. Another thing that is a patch. I mean, okay, the problem with patch is you don't expect it to disappear, right? The whole point of some of these other ones is, like a graft, for example, you expect it to disappear once it's been inserted. Yeah, and embed is, we've kind of used embed for other things, and I think it will be hard to understand that embed as a noun is being used as a noun.
It's whimsical, but spackle is something that.
What? I never even heard of it.
It's the, like, if you have a hole in your drywall, the material you use is called spackle. It basically fills in the void and disappears.
I have never heard that word in my life. How is it spelled? That's a bad sign. I think you already lost the.
Yeah, but SPACKLE.
Okay. Well, but again, we don't want this to. It is not a piece of grout, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a pure filler. It is something that has real content, but it is being inserted.
Yeah, it's absorbed by the parent material.
Yeah, Carl is commenting that things like thread are very knitting related. Okay, guys, come on. We're getting there here. Very frustrating process, but I like. I mean, and I really would love to have a one-word thing if we can do it. But then, okay, so let's look at the ones that are still alive here. List sequence is sort of still alive. I wish it wasn't so long. And I wish it didn't have the confusion of the Verogs thing.
My favorites are list sequence and sublist. Sublist could be generalized to sub-expression for the general concept.
My preference is sublist.
What is sublist? I don't even understand sublist. X goes to the sublist ABC.
Well, it's a sublist because it will be inserted in the surrounding list.
Well, it's been a. Okay, so let's look at that one. But don't you say a list of sublists A, B, C, D, etc.? In other words, doesn't sublist suggest that it is still a thing, rather than that it is absorbed?
Can you open the page of sequence position? For example,
Right.
we use
That's an interesting fact. I didn't know. Dan on live stream was saying that Lisp used the term splice for this. Coalescence. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to name. We're looking for a noun here. Okay, which page should I look for? Sequence.
Sequence position.
Okay, so the current suggestion here, yeah, but remember, sorry, people who are commenting on languages using things like Splice. I don't know what other people have done for this, but I think they are not trying to name the symbolic object that does this. They are trying to name the operation of doing it, which is different. The whole point is that what we're doing here, we've had, the operation of doing this like flatten for millions of years. Well, at least 33 years. So okay, let's review. Let's look at Pete's helpful suggestions for sentences here. Okay, so let's take this one as an example. So we'd say, okay, in a big list, 0 goes to the that's not bad, goes to the sublist. Let's try this one. Insert, well, that's not bad. Insert in ABC the sublist as a sublist. You see that the problem is, as a sublist doesn't really work, because when we say sublist to mean that list is still there.
Not necessarily. I mean, it depends how we write it. We could say sublist of ABC, like we do with sequence, that we name the objects rather than naming the whole thing.
Sorry, what are you saying with sequence? What?
I'm thinking about how to document it, how to write it in the reference page.
Yes. Represents a woman. Let's see what you did for Spliced so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, look, we managed to wordsmith it. Headless. Headless would have been a good name for sequence, actually. Headless would have been a really good name for sequence. Wish we had a time machine to go back and do that. That would have been a good name because it would have suggested that it's something weird. We should remember that. That's a. You see what I'm saying? Because that's effectively what sequence is a headless object.
Yep.
That's a really interesting idea for that. Good idea. I mean, that's in the, that's in the sort of department of nothings. Well, that's interesting. I mean, if we ever needed to tweak how sequence works, headless would be an interesting direction. Can we make sure we note that down for sure?
Yes. Yeah, I'll make a note.
Okay. Carl is saying in the documentation, for sequence, it says sequence is automatically spliced in. Oh my gosh. He's saying just go back to Spliced. This business with naming is one of the most painful. It's so painful because sometimes you get it in 15 seconds, and sometimes it takes years. The absolutely worst case in my life is naming the science of exploring the computational universe. I have tried so many names for that without coming up with anything I really like. My most recent one was because I have reasons to want to name it again, and it's kind of cyberzoology or something, but that has completely the wrong connotations. Although I was feeling that was what I was doing recently, exploring a bunch of different weird rules and what they do. But anyway, that's been my all-time worst naming experience, because every possible word for that from all the classical kinds of languages has been taken a zillion times for a zillion different things. Yeah, when placed inside a list represents multiple top-level elements. Right.
Well, what about headless list?
No, because it's not the right thing, because that would be Verogs, among other things. I think that's very weird. Headless list suggests it's something you shouldn't look. Headless suggests it's something that's a little bit funky to do, right? It's something a little weird, which is what I think should be thought of with sequence. It's a thing that's okay, we're getting suggestions for the science. Okay.
Well, we have two senses of list here. The fact that it contains a list and the fact that it splices into a list.
Yes.
So in a sense, the headless goes to the splicing and the list goes to
It's not going to make it. It's too weird. It has images of headless chickens and terrible things like that.
Okay.
I mean, it is a good thing for a rather weird operation that you don't expect people to do very much.
I see what you mean.
Let's see. Okay, so let's review again where we're at. We've really got to make a decision on this. This is terrible. It's terrible. Okay, Sublist.
I don't agree that Sublist sounds like the list wrapper is still present afterwards. Like,
okay,
if we have list ABC, I would say that the list AB is a sublist of the list ABC, but there's no literal list braces around the A and the B.
Yeah, I think you're being somewhat mathy there. I'm not sure that people would, what would you say if you have a list of the list XY, the list AB? You would say those are sublists of the big list.
I'd say they're elements of the big list.
You're being too mathy. Other people would say they're sublists, in my view.
What about the general case of sub-expression? Does it work better for you?
Well, it's not going to work for the list case. No, I don't think so.
No. I'm trying to think ahead of the general case. What would be the name? It would be good to have a name that matches.
I agree. Although I think we could add argument. I think the other case is a little bit more obscure than this one. Unfortunately, elements is just too generic. Coset is deeply too mathy. I don't even know why it would be quite. It's amusing, but it's definitely okay. What have we got? Let's list our nouns. Okay, we have got we've got sublist. We've got graft, which I don't like. We've got some kind of multiple elements, which I think is just too long. I mean, if we can, it's a wimp out. I think we really should try to do this in one word. We've got inlay, but it's obscure. It's too whimsical. Inlay is too whimsical. Patch is too hacky.
Elements seems to be the most grammatically correct one word name.
Yeah, but it's really way too generic.
Mm-hmm.
Close to element.
Yeah, vanishing list, evaporating list, all those kinds of things. I gosh, must be a sign that I'm getting too ancient, but I'm was it in, oh my gosh, I can't remember whether it was in SMP or early Mathematica that we had this notion of evaporating lists. That was a disaster. A listoid. That's an amusing idea. Pity. I mean, it's a good word for something. I like that word. We should use that for something. It's just, it suggests it's a yet different data structure, which is a vanishing list. Yeah, I mean, that's in the snippet we've already used, actually, and it means exactly the right thing in the use that we've made of it, which is a snippet of text, for example. Unnested. Unnested is going back to a spliced concept. What's that?
Listlet.
No, but listlet is very amusing, but it doesn't really say what it is. I wish that graft and inlay just had words that were like them, but were a little less specific, a little less evocative.
What about trying to start from nothing, like nothing list?
I think we're getting desperate. Very literally would be something like a list insertion. Yeah, things like mini list and so on, they're cute, but I don't think that I don't know what they really suggest, but it isn't quite. Boy, this is ingraft. What is an ingraft? An ingraft sounds right, but I don't know what it is. Never heard of it. I want to come back to the word insertion again. What is insertion function? Insertion function is actually doing the right thing.
In object-oriented programming, there's mixins.
Yeah, it's a slightly different thing.
I wouldn't want to use mixins for this, though.
No. Colk is amusing. Consecution, what the heck is that? Yeah. Fill in.
Can we invent a word like in list?
What do you guys think of insertion? No, it won't work. List insertion is. List insertion is kind of part way into Spliced, but not quite the same. I mean, you know, X goes to the list insertion. It's a bit technical sounding. It's a pity we couldn't have the word insert, but obviously it's spelled the same way as, yeah, insert is already used in graphics. Inline I thought about, but I think it's a little bit too typesetting. Insertee is amusing, but
Inserted. Stepping away
like
from
Spliced. It's just like that's like Spliced. Spliced is better. Inserted suggests oh great. Enlist is an archaic form of enlist, which doesn't help us really. There's people bare list, naked lists. I don't think so. We don't want to get tagged as a non G-rated piece of software for some silly reason. Well, spliced list, as Dan points out, that's a noun form of spliced. Spliced list. I don't think it helps us above spliced though, but it's kind of nounifying the concept of spliced. Ethan is asking, why is spliced bad? Spliced is looking better after this, adventure here. But I'm still not, I don't disagree that it would be really nice to have something which is a noun. Spliced list. All right, let's talk about graphed again for a second. Is it too evocative, too crazy? What do we say?
It's the first time I've heard that word.
I'm sorry?
It's the first time I've heard that word.
That is a very, very bad sign. Oops, that's not the word I wanted at all. I wanted graphed. Oh dear.
He's listing, I think.
Listing?
Listing.
Like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking, just as you were starting to say that, I was just thinking about splicing. A splicing. Doesn't quite help us. Yeah, a fragment we've talked about. Should have that on this list. Fragment. Come on, there's a way, there's something that you do when, if you are Inserting something so it will dissolve in the thing, but leaves its payload, so to speak, inserted there.
A pill.
What's that?
Pill, like when you take a pill.
Pill? What pill? As in,
The
oh,
medicine.
pill. Yes, I don't think so. But is there something from around that? Dang, this is hard.
Capsule?
Actually, I think that's been used for some crazy thing in graphics, but capsule is not, doesn't have the linearity, the sense of linearity, but it's not obviously ridiculous. It's a little bit of a heavy thing for what we're trying to talk about here.
Retrovirus.
Yeah, it's a good example, but I don't think we quite. A retrovirus does the right thing, as in,
Now that we go in medicine, what about tablet in relation to table?
what tablet? What tablet? As in tablets, like that you would find on made of stone? I'm totally confused.
I'm looking for synonyms of pill, and it appears second.
Tablet? Oh, tablet, that kind of tablet. Oh my gosh, I was completely confused. I was off thinking about stone tablets. I wasn't thinking about tablets as in a tablet form of medicine. Okay, let's look back here. Okay, I don't think listing is going to make it, so let's put that in there. I don't even know what to name this this horrendous activity. We've probably had names for this. See, this is one of these things where we can't even name the we could call this spliced, I suppose. Just like we have things that we named with the former names of manipulate, which we'll now never be able to find. Retrovirus really does the right thing, but clearly is absolutely unusable. What are some terms that come from that have been used in genomics? I mean, and I'm not talking, like open reading frame or something, but that's not relevant here. But something that is like what a retrovirus. What do people say a retrovirus does? It splices itself into a genome, probably is what they'd say. I wonder whether there's a different word for that. Okay, let's look at the word splice for a second, and let's look at its noun forms. A splicer, whoops, that's not, I wrote the wrong thing. Splicer, a splicing.
Allegedly, splice can be used as a noun, just as splice.
Yeah, a splice. Yes, it can be used as a noun. But unfortunately, we have already used it's a deprecated function, long deprecated. He says, now he's gonna, yeah. Okay, so it's been deprecated for 6 years. And it was not widely used before that. And it never had a one argument form. A splicium, yeah. Fusion. Yes, I mean, I'm afraid words like infusion just have two. Splice. What do we think about that? Ignoring the conflict with the long gone splice from version 1. Which Tapa is saying, if it's been deprecated for 6 years, you can use it again. You know, in our world of this kind of language design, 6 years is a blink of an eye. What do people think about splice? A splice. Anybody want to comment on that?
To me, it sounds very similar to spliced.
Well, that's fine. What's wrong with that? But it's a noun. It is the splice. Now, what we would do with arguments, I'm not sure. It is a splice which will be put into the list.
Yeah, if we can use it as we use sequence as nouns, then this is better.
Boy, we just spent an hour and a half and we're going to have the result that we drop a D. Let's look at these things here, okay? So let's look back at these examples. 0 is the splice. I don't know. It's hard to read. Okay, various people are saying splice is nice. That's a good motto at least. Okay, so we insert into ABC the splice 9899. You know what? This could work. I mean, you know, the word association, when we very, very, very first introduced it, we didn't start, you know, putting it into an association is something that we quickly got used to saying. Putting it into a splice is yeah. Anyway, I'd be interested in some other people from the live stream who've been commenting on names. I am basically warming to the word splice. It will be our first example of an actual serious reuse of a deprecated name. I mean, it fell out of use. I think it was de-documented by version 2, which is 1990 something or other. By the time many of our users were born after the thing was deprecated, we probably can get away with considering it reusable. All right, look, I think that's where we should. Sanders says splice or spliced seems the same to him, but I think it is subtly useful to treat it differently. I don't feel super enthused about Splice, but I feel more optimistic about it than about these other things. Jose, what do you think?
I think I like better Spliced than Spliced. And I was now looking through our code to see if we use Splice still anywhere, and I cannot find anywhere.
In the whole code base?
Yes, in startup for sure. And then in other places, I'm now looking and I cannot find.
Yeah, I think it's been deeply deprecated for like 27 years or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, being able to say a splice would be nice. Like we say, a sequence. That certainly would be nice.
Well, that's encouraging. It beeps and says it couldn't be found. This thing here, splicing Wolfram language output into external files. It better. I can't believe that tutorial is still there. Well, that should be replaced by whatever that is. Should be replaced by something about templates. It doesn't really matter. The thing never had a one argument form anyway. Do I need to get down the physical version 1 Mathematica book from my shelf to find out what the thing? I'm not even going to tell people what it did. Just suffice it to say, it did the same. It did something like what file template does now, as that documentation just says there. All right. Well, I'm thinking that we go with the word splice.
Okay.
And still a little bit unsure, but I think but I think we also need to think about how it works. Argument splice. Could we use argument splice? We could use that for the other case. An argument splice. I mean, that brings the word splice up to, you know, things like association, just a thing that.
Well, we could use the same splice with 2 arguments. In the second argument, we specify the head it splices into. Which by
yes, we could do that. Yeah, we could do that. Let's give it another day to rattle around before we start changing code. Mm-hmm. I'm still not 100% happy.
I like Pete's suggestion that splice would look at the head of the thing you gave. So if you just did H of ABC, then it splices.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah. That's an interesting idea. I mean, that would serve as a different purpose, independent of I mean, because that would only work if H is an inert head, but there are definitely cases of that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, well, listen, I really appreciate everybody's input here. I hope we have a good, I'm still not 100% on this one, but, and I do thank Pete particularly for raising this and pointing out that we hadn't really solved it. Some comments here about live streams on mail server functionality. That's interesting. I maybe somebody other than me could do that, because I think it's interesting to hear that there are issues with that. That should pass that on.
Sure.
All right. I thank you all very much. And as I said, to people who are asking about when was I going to be talking about the physics project, I am hoping within the next few weeks I will be able to launch that, and I will be doing many live streams. I think initially sort of an intro one, and then I will do a kind of an introductory live stream for physicists, one for mathematicians, one for computer scientists, and probably one for philosophy-oriented folk. And they will have quite high levels of technicality for those who want it. All right. Thank you all very much. See you all soon.